This project is a unique and interesting one for me. It's a commission piece, which I've done plenty of those, but the first interesting part of this one is that the wood was actually provided by the customer. And he's creating a larger piece. This is just one part of it. And so you can see this part is a book form with curved pages here and the spine down the middle. And this particular item, this piece of wood, is just a practice piece. He sent me two, one to kind of practice on and see how it works, and then I've got the other real piece going on here once I get things figured out with the practice. And it's not as straightforward as I thought it was. When I talked to him and kind of looked at the mock-ups, I was like, oh yeah, that's not a problem, can definitely do that. One of the things that the customer wanted was to have the text read as smoothly as possible, and so I pushed the text together close to the spine, and I was a little too aggressive on how close I got those, a little too optimistic on my ability to get the knife down and carve in there. And so the angles on the inside here aren't great, and you can see it has a period down here, which is going to be very difficult to get a smooth circle with the knife kind of running up against the other side there. In fact, you might be able to see right here there's kind of this groove where I had the knife laid down as I was doing, I think probably the E here. So I think on the final piece I'm going to have to draw the pieces of text away from the spine just a little bit to give me a little bit more room to work in there. And when I was creating the text, I had to kind of finagle with it a little bit, because you can see on this piece I've got some lines that the text needs to be within this range, because there's going to be another wood piece that connects and overlaps up here, so there needs to be enough room for that overlap without interfering with or being too crunched on the text. So that's why there's this big gap up here, and I think I got that the size and everything figured out there. But the other issue that I've been running into, and good thing I've been working on the practice board, is the basswood does not seem to be responding the way most basswood does that I've worked with. Not sure why. I don't know if it's just the tree or the source or age of the wood or what. So to solve that, I'm making sure that my knife is as sharp as I can get it. Just being aware of that also can help mitigate, kind of making sure I'm careful and listening to and feeling the grain as I cut. But also solution of rubbing alcohol in water. I know that's a common thing the loft chip carvers do for difficult wood, and I've actually not had to use it myself in the basswood that I've carved, but this one I might need to be going to that a little bit. The downside I'm seeing with that, though, is as it makes the wood wet, it makes the wood a bit easier to crush, and so again that plays into making sure that the knife is very sharp so that it slices through even the kind of soft wet wood rather than just crushing it. So I'm going to go ahead and finish carving this practice piece just to kind of get in the groove, get a feel for what's going on here with the curved surface and the gutter down the middle, and then I'll resume once I get going on the final project. Okay, the practice carving is complete, and I don't know how well it'll show up on the video, but the last section here went much better. I didn't have any of the grain tearing out, and even the period, not perfect, but went better than expected for being on that edge and with the roundedness. When I did the final project, the way that I applied it is I printed off, and I've got a line there, and so I just folded it and stuck it down in the middle, taped the two sides, and I'm able to do those and get it to follow the line. And even though on the computer I did move the two pieces of text a little bit further away from the center line, I'm not sure that they actually ended up much further away. I used a ruler and it looks like they're about 1 millimeter further apart, and I was going for a little bit more than that. I think the reason is I was probably not intentional or not careful about making sure that I pushed this the same amount down in the wood between the two. So if I push this further down, they get closer. If I kind of pull it up, they get further apart. So I think between that and potentially any inconsistencies in the contours between the two pieces ended up actually causing it to not be as separated as I was intending. But I think that should be okay, at least visually, assuming I can do the carving part well enough. The aspect of the knife angle I think should be okay. As you can see a little bit here with the vertical lines on the R, the E, the M, from a straight view, the middle line, deepest part, looks actually even. If you rotate it this way, you can see that the outside is a lot steeper than this side, and so it's off center. But when you view it straight on, it actually looks just fine. So I think that might work well for the final thing, again, assuming I can avoid some of the issues that I had in carving. And so using that practice was useful. I know what to expect, and hopefully I can address those. So next up, carve the project. I'm about to get started on carving the final version here of this project with the book and the text. And based on my practice, I made some changes. The first thing was making sure that my knives are resharpened. Instead of just going back to the strop, I went to the sharpening stone to make sure that they're very sharp and all the way out to the tip. One issue that I often have with my chip carving knives is the very nature of chip carving is I'm usually only using about the last few millimeters of the blade, and so that'll kind of get dull, and even though the back of it's still very sharp, since it hardly gets used, there's kind of an unevenness in the sharpness. So I make sure it's all fully sharp all the way to the tip and very keen there. So that's good to go. That'll help with any grain issues that I might have, as well as dealing with this curved part of the spine of the book. And the other thing is some rubbing alcohol and water solution to just help make the knife go smoother through the wood. I'm going to try to avoid using that. I don't particularly care for the feel of the wood. Kind of gets a little bit soft and squishy compared to the kind of natural crispness that wood has when it's dry. So prefer not to use that, but I will use it if I need to, if I feel that the grain's not really responding the way that I want to the knife. And since this is just text and I've done it a bunch of times, I may well end up kind of speeding through this, fast forwarding the video, but I'll get started here and talk through at least what I'm doing at the beginning. And I would normally start on the S, but just to kind of get a feel, I'm going to go ahead and start on the T actually, because it'll be just an easier letter. It's all straight lines, and that'll give me a bit of a feel for what this wood is doing before I work on the little bit trickier S. Oftentimes I would just do these serifs, the little flares at the end, in one stroke. As I'm coming down the T, I'd kind of come out. These are, this is bigger text than I usually do, so I'm finding it easier to do them separately. Just do the straight lines straight on their own first, and then come back and remove the serifs. So that went nicely. Didn't notice any issues with the wood grain on T. And this is going to create a weak spot here with this part of the wood that's not cut, forming a tight angle here at the top of the M. So rather than cutting this part and then trying to come back and cut this, leaving that exposed, I'm going to go ahead and do this cut first, coming away from it, where it still has the support of the right side there. And then, kind of in that same vein, start here, again, make the cut while it's supported, and then cut away from it. And this has the added benefit of being with the grain cut, which I prefer to make anyway. So now we're gonna get into some of the more challenging section where my hand is now running into the other side of the wood. And so same thing, so I would normally kind of come back on this bottom side, but I'm going to do the top side here first for that tight angle. And the curvature of this wood really messes with trying to make straight cuts. The geometry just doesn't work the same way I expect it to. Move a little bit more of this black line that I missed. Part of the idea on making this extra cut is just to make it more correct, follow the pattern line. But part of it too is less ink I have to remove when I'm done. So I always prefer to follow the pattern lines as closely as possible for both of those reasons. So now I'm getting into the part of the text that is very angled, wrapping down around that spine of the book. And kind of dealing with the relative angle of the knife as I do so. We normally want two symmetric 65-degree angles on either side of that, which is not possible. I can't get the knife laid down enough like this. So I'm going to end up with asymmetric angles, but as I mentioned earlier, I think that's going to be just fine with the kind of optical nature of the book. So picking up here, you might be able to see I did end up running into a little bit of issue on the N up here and down here. The grain did kind of rip, and it looks like there's just kind of some differences in the grain or the way the wood is finished or something down in this area, and right along the sharp bend there is definitely going to be kind of an issue anyway. So you can see it's a bit wet. I did finish that up with a little bit of the spray solution here, so I'm going to go ahead and use it again on this other side as I do the E. I think it should be fine in the V and the A. This other stuff has been fine, so just to kind of give me a little bit of assistance on getting good results over here on the E. I'll go and like to go about as light as I can on that, so it's not making the wood too wet. Give that a few seconds to kind of evaporate off a little bit. And again, I'm not too worried about this stuff out here, mostly just as I'm coming deep and getting kind of weird knife angles and everything in that crevice. Yeah, the wood definitely, with the solution on it, just feels really soft and kind of unresponsive, if that makes any sense. It doesn't give me a good feel for really what's going on in the grain, which is why I prefer not to use it if I don't have to, but I also really don't want to get any more of those pieces of damage or mistakes on it, so I'm doing the best I can on what seems to make the most sense. Again, as I'm doing this far edge here, I need to make sure this side of the knife handle isn't dragging on that. It'll put a dent and a nice streak in there, which I had happen in the practice. So making sure to keep my finger down, but not in the normal position. I'd normally have my finger kind of up here, but that doesn't give me the angle I need. So I need to lay it down more, kind of bring my finger out, let me get the knife closer, but still protect that wood. And with these two cuts, this one that ends up being steeper, they don't end up having to go deeper to get them to line up. So take a couple of passes here. So that one's really even more off-center than the R is above it, but we'll see how it looks at the end here. I don't think it should be too much of a problem. Alright, just about done. Got all the text, actual letters done. Just got the last period here, and I saved that for last because I think it's going to be perhaps the most challenging aspect of that, doing the period, which is just a perfect circle, so deep onto this. curved part. You can see I did spray it with the water alcohol solution, let it sit for a minute to both soak in but also start to evaporate so it's not quite so soft, and see what I can do with that. I did change the camera angle just to try to get a better view down into this curved surface here. And as it curves away from me, it's difficult to get the knife on that on the line. It wants to, the knife is kind of coming in tighter on the circle away from the pattern line, and then it digs in more as I come back up this way. And so same as the other ones, obviously when you look at it straight on, the point in the middle is well off center, but when you look down this way as though actually reading it, it appears mostly centered. So like I said, I'll call that acceptable. And it's not quite as perfectly circular as I would like it to be, and in most circumstances I would probably try to adjust that, but I think given what I'm working with, for fear of making it worse, which is always a possibility with chip carving, the more you go in, the more you risk kind of messing it up, and I think that's probably about as good as I'm going to be able to get it given what I've got here. So I'm going to clean this up and maybe do a little bit of final touch-up, check everything in some outdoor lighting and see how it looks. So here's the final result of how the chip carving part turned out. Front view is kind of the main look of it, but if we come down you can kind of see the 3D book aspect and the letters there wrapping around the pages as it kind of curves around. Feels a little weird for me not doing the finishing products, the sanding sealer and whatnot, so the carving kind of looks a little bit different than I'm used to for calling it done. And since it's not really my project on the whole, I'm not adding my signature to it. All I did was the chip carving, which is all in all a pretty small portion of what's going to be done here. So I'm looking forward to seeing a picture from the buyer of what it's going to look like when it's all done.